we move on to module number 22 of course in applied linguistics of the UGC course the general course in e-Pathshala in linguistics. And the 22nd module is concerned with the L2 or foreign language or L3 learners, L4 learners output. We talked about this briefly earlier, but we now want to examine it in some detail. We have been saying that there are various ways of looking at the output of the L2 or L3 learner or the foreign language learner, where the language is not the first or one of the first languages of the child. It is the language which is largely learnt in tutored settings. That means in informal situations through materials and through teachers and through various other sources, but it is not acquired as naturally as the first language or the first few languages of the child. Even although, as we have been increasingly mentioning, that the processes of acquisition in the second language or third language may be comparable of those languages being acquired as first languages. So we should keep that in mind. The whole movement from looking at the L2 learners' output in terms of mistakes and errors, and then in terms of contrastive analysis and the theory of interference, has been to look at the L2 learners' output as a system in its own right, with its own features, rather than just L1 dependent or a set of mistakes that you look at the output and you list out the mistakes. So some of the important concepts that were given to examine and understand the L2 learners' output include interlanguage, approximative systems, and idiosyncratic dialects, for example. The concept of idiosyncratic dialects was given by Pitcorder. A very important concept of interlanguage was given by Larry Salinker, and it's all discussed in your module, which is with you. We have been sort of trying to say again and again that some of the errors, particularly at the phonological level, at the pronunciation level, may be located in L1, may be traced back to L1, or to the what Salinker would call the transfer of training, that originally they were located in L1, but now they have become a part of the local L2, let us say Indian English, and now they are being transferred, so they can't even be called L1 dependent. So most of the errors, so-called errors, are actually L1 independent, or they are called developmental errors. That means that there is a well-established trajectory of learning a particular target language, and learners have to go through that trajectory and those stages. Salinker, who gave the concept of interlanguage in 1972, argued that in addition to what Chomsky referred to as linguistic competence in the human mind is also equipped with a latent psychological structure. And this latent psychological structure in the human mind gets activated whenever you are confronted with a second language, and you're supposed to learn it. And he says that error analysis only tells you the errors and it classifies and categorizes the errors. But IL, that means interlanguage, tells you the systematic nature of the interlanguage. That's the project of interlanguage. So interlanguage is considered a language in between L1 and L2, but in a sense a system in its own right. And Selinker said there are 5 major processes that are responsible for the uh, acquisition of a second language, and these are language transfer. And language transfer, as I tried to explain to you again and again, is not just located in L1, it could be located in all kinds of sources. It could be located in the language of the parents, it could be located in the language of the teachers or the peer group. Then there is transfer of training, as children are being taught in the school by the community of teachers. So their training might influence. Then there are sort of general strategies of acquiring a second language. They get activated when you are trying to acquire a second language. Then there are strategies of second language communication. Let me give you one example. For example, if you are learning a second language, you try your best to make use of whatever little you know. One of my aunts had acquired the word clever, but she could never make a distinction between clever and cunning. So that was fine. So she would say, such and such person is very clever, whereas she actually meant he or she was very cunning. Not only that, uh, something that is technically called wholesale syncretism in second language acquisition. She knew that word, and she was very fond of that, using that word, and gradually learning more words of English at a fairly advanced age. So one day there were mangoes, which were far too ripe, and she said, "This, in sort of Punjabi, but using the word clever, that this mango looks very clever. It's not right. It's not good. So ये आम तो बहुत clever लगता है, that kind of thing. So extending the use of clever, and you can overgeneralize the rule, for foreign language, as we saw. Entry will be by tickets. Don't pull my legs. You are overgeneralizing. You are doing generalization. Or, for example, you might say gold, okay, or come, for example. And then finally, you may do spelling pronunciation. Somebody may come and tell you that the standard thing to do is to say car park. Please say car park. So you learn in the class car park. But then you come home and read the book and you see the R at both the places and you say car park. And if you have not been trained enough, you say car park. Car park. Quite a common pronunciation in India. So these are spelling pronunciation. And if you now look at your screen, this screen should be in front of you. Very often, things that are called TOT and SOT are responsible for what we pick up as errors and sort of punish our students. So TOT is the tip of the tongue phenomenon, and SOT means slip of the tongue phenomenon. Very, very common. It happens to all of us. Now, TOT, tip of the tongue, is when you say, what I was saying, the name of that person is, yes, oh God, I can't remember it. So when something is simultaneously inaccessible but imminent, it's there, it's not there. You can't get it. For example, if you are trying to remember an Urdu couplet, then you say, my God, I always knew it. What happened? Then you break your head, and then you say, okay, let me see how it ended, and then you say, yeah, it ended with tak. Then you come to say, oh yeah, आह को चाहिए इतनी असर होने तक, कौन जीता है तेरी जुल्फ के सर होने तक. So then that tuck, that so it's the tip of the tongue phenomena, which then, if you struggle with it enough, you get back the whole. Slip of the tongue is more interesting. If you see on your screen, where, it's also called the bathtub effect. Bathtub is like this. So what happens is very often you remember the beginning and the end of the word, but the middle of the word you mess up. So something like, he told me a funny, you want to say a funny anecdote, but you say, he told me a funny antidote. It's common. So the bathtub effect, messing up the middle of the word, or why are you insinuating, whereas you want to say, why are you insinuating, why are you accusing me, and so on. One thing that Selinker made very popular and came to be known as one of his major contributions to second language acquisition was the phenomena of fossilization. That certain structures tend to get, fossilized in relation to the target language. So it could be linguistic items or rules or subsystems which the speakers of a particular native language make a part of their language, a part of their second language. So as I told you, the tag question, for example, may be a part of Indian English. Unaspirated pataka may be a part of, may have become a fossilized part of Indian English. Similarly, to substitute the interdental th and the by the dental th and the might be, more or less fossilized, except in the speech of a few people. We must understand that fossilization, again, like error analysis, gives you the impression as if nothing more is possible. Now that perspective is not true. That perspective is certainly not true. We need to understand that children can always learn, okay? And they can learn everything. They can learn all kinds of sounds, all kinds of expressions. Only thing is, they need to be provided adequate kind of exposure and adequate kind of environment in which learning can take place, rather than an environment which is full of anxiety and which is very threatening. The next slide about idiosyncratic dialects is again on your screen. So I would like you to look at your screen, and this concept was given by Pitcorda, and Pitcorda sort of said that, I need to read that for you, that language can be, there can be 4 kinds of idiosyncratic dialects, right? So he said the language of poetry, 1, language of children, and language of aphasics, and L2 learner. These are the 4 idiosyncratic dialects, that means idiosyncratic varieties that can be deviant in different ways. For example, the language of poetry is deliberately deviant. It's not that people make it deviant. They fool them, but they make it deviant. It's not that they don't know the target language. So a poet like E. Cummings, a famous poet of English language, he writes a poem like, anyone lives in a pretty how town with up so floating many bells down. This is a poem on your screen. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, he sang his didn't, he danced his did. A beautiful poem, but it violates all rules of the English language because it is not accidentally deviant, it is deliberately deviant. On the other hand, if you look at aphasics, their language is pathologically deviant. They have some pathological problem, and if you look at the screen, if you have problems with the Wernicke's, if you have Wernicke's aphasia, then you can speak sentences like, that Spoodle pinkered, and that I went to get him round and take care of him when you want before. So it's all messed up. A person who suffers from Broca's aphasia may say walk dog when he wants to say I'll walk the dog. Or he might say book to table instead of saying there are two books on the table. So these are because there is a pathological issue. Their language is pathologically, their language is called pathologically deviant dialect. But the language of the L2 learners is naturally deviant. Now, this is the important point. It is not that they are being creatively deviant like the poets. It is not that they are pathologically deviant. They are naturally deviant. Okay, and they are not aphasics. They are perfectly healthy children, but their language, their the to say that their language is naturally deviant is to say that it is a necessary part of the trajectory that they have to follow. The point is that at each point, that is why we talk of approximative systems, at each point, at each stage of the approximative system, it is systematically organized. Okay. And if you remember, we have already talked about the typology of errors in terms of these being systematic. The errors could be pre-systematic, systematic, or post-systematic. This we have already discussed, and I don't think I'll repeat that. But I hope you have been able to appreciate that there will be a large number of factors that might influence the L2 output, like transfer of training, like overgeneralization, like ignorance of rule restrictions. This is the ignorance of rule restriction that you have to say children rather than childs. The perfect thing would be to say childs. Or, for example, in a particular collocation, you have to say entry will be by ticket or don't pull my leg. It's an ignorance of certain restrictions on the rules. Or, spelling pronunciations might be there, or they might have hypothesized the wrong concept. All these things are explained in your module. And finally, you see there may be a sort of universal hierarchy of language learning. It is possible that a sentence, the passive of a sentence such as John hit Mary, as compared to the passive of John watered the plants. So the plants were watered by John and Mary was hit by John. But you see, both John and Mary can be agents. Right? So there is a chance of some confusion. So that might be acquired later. But plants can't water John. Okay? Only John can water plants. So there is that. Plants cannot become agents in the process of watering. So there may be some universal hierarchy of difficulty, certain kinds. For example, if you're learning Hindi as a second language, then it is possible that retroflexion, which is not, retroflexion means t, t, th, d, dh. These might be most alien and may be learned the last. This may be, there is a hierarchy of difficulty that retroflex sounds are more difficult to learn. These areas are still being explored. We don't know the ultimate truth about them, but the whole point of this module is that let us look at the output of the L2 learner in terms of its own right, as a system in its own right, rather than dismissing it as full of errors or as deviant or as some set of pathologies to be eradicated. Thank you very much.